You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, and the Bloomberg Business app. Or listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
And welcome to the Thursday edition of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Mathieu in Washington. Welcome to Little Friday. The headline says it all, as usual, on the terminal. Biden-Xi meeting delivers small wins and promises of better ties. This, of course, coming off the big meet yesterday. We talked about it here on Sound On. We brought you the president's news conference last evening. We were up late last night, weren't we? I'm glad that you were with us here because we walked through this whole exercise of the deliverables, what was accomplished. And at the very end of that, it always happens in the last question at these news conferences. Maybe you heard this already. Joe Biden being asked at the very end of his news conference, just as he's walking out of the room. Listen.
And after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that we used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
Let's get into it for a minute with Iain Marlow, Bloomberg senior reporter, with us at the table here in Washington. Iain, great to see you. Thanks for coming back on here. I remember the last time the president used that word. This is why everyone stopped down, because it caused problems. President Xi doesn't like to be referred to as a dictator, even if it does meet the definition in the dictionary. Was that a calculated statement?
I mean, it's hard to tell with Biden, some of the gaffes that come out. But with this, it was a firm reminder that despite the agreements, despite the sort of general bonhomie that you saw, these are still competitive rivals, the U.S. and China. There's no change there. These agreements were interesting, and we can talk about that, but sort of surface level things that do nothing to really change the sort of worsening geopolitical rivalry that you have between the U.S. and China. And his remark is a sort of stark reminder of that. It's also a stark reminder of the domestic pressure that he feels when it comes to the China relationship, too.
Well, that's where this was being aimed, obviously, right? And President Xi had his own version of that. If you read the readout that came from Beijing, kind of scolding the U.S. For Taiwan, among other things. But let's talk about what was constructive here when it comes to counter narcotics, when it comes to military operations. The fact that they were even in the same room, all of those are kind of a big deal, are they not?
Yeah, there's been a really intensive sort of 6-month process, starting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to Beijing back in June, which sort of unlocked all these cabinet level visits, where clearly it seems they were saving up some of the big deliverables for the big, the meeting of the bosses to some extent. And what we saw was actually pretty interesting. I mean, on the domestic front, fentanyl and the opioid crisis in the U.S. is a huge issue for Biden and this administration. Blinken has made a huge point of contact with his Chinese counterparts. And on the other side, the restoring military-to-military communications, this was something that actually I don't think many people, up until the last week when things started trickling out, that many people expected. I think a lot of people thought China did not want to play ball on having the militaries work more closely together, because that means it would give the U.S. confidence to sort of come into Asia with their military even more than they are already, and just make sure that they can do it without causing a conflict. So it wasn't something that seemed to be in China's interest to do it. So both of these developments are actually fairly interesting when it comes to that.
Fascinating. We appreciate your perspective very much, Iain. Let's get you in here a lot more often. Iain Marlow, find his work on the terminal and at Bloomberg.com. Appreciate the reporting and the perspective as we add the Congressman to the conversation. Jake Auchincloss joins now, the Democrat from Massachusetts, who, of course, brings a unique view to what we're talking about here as a member of the China Select Committee. And we'll get to some other issues here as well, Congressman, that I know that you'll probably want to talk about here. But I wonder your thoughts, having seen the president cross the country and actually sit down with the leader of the world's second largest economy. Let's start with military-to-military communications. Will that prevent more close calls, for instance, in the South China Sea? How much progress did you see yesterday?
It's progress. Whether it prevents close calls is up to the People's Liberation Army. They're the ones who have been aggressive, unprofessional in their behavior in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. What it can definitely help prevent, though, is those close calls accidentally escalating into a shooting match. Neither side wants war. We need to reduce the chances for conflict, particularly inadvertent conflict. And having those mill-to-mill ties, not just at the political leadership level, but really at the field grade and general grade levels, can reduce misunderstandings and allow these situations to be diffused. That's just good global governance for both sides.
Counter narcotics also on the agenda. I know that your state of Massachusetts, my former home, is no stranger to the impact of fentanyl. That is getting very good reviews here and an agreement to continue talks over the climate. Congressman, should there have been more progress when it comes to climate, or is that just a bridge too far in the first meeting in so long?
Well, China has recognized that reducing carbon emissions is in its own interest and has committed to taking bolder and more aggressive action. There's no doubt, though, that the bigger near-term win was the fentanyl accord. Now, I don't trust China on this issue. They have previously made commitments that they have not followed through on. But I'm somebody who commanded a special operations mission to Panama, working with other countries to help with drug interdiction. I have seen firsthand the importance of having international assistance in combating drug trade. And it is critical that China cracks down on the export of basic ingredients for fentanyl production by the Mexican drug cartels. So even if they are only incremental or haphazard in their implementation of this agreement, it will still help stem the inflow of opioids and will save American lives. This is a win for the president.
I've got to ask you about the dictator remark before I move on, because I'm guessing that there were a lot of members, maybe including yourself, on the China Select Committee who wanted to hear some language like that. Obviously, we need to work together to some point, but we also want to keep a hard line when it comes to China. Was that a helpful remark or not?
It's a valid remark. Xi Jinping is a dictator. He is turning his country towards totalitarianism. He views individuals as pawns of the state. The United States recognizes the inherent value and dignity of individuals, not just in America, but in Ukraine and in Taiwan and in Israel. And we will defend democracy at home and abroad. There are clear divides over values that we will contest in the 21st century. So while we want to be smart in our competition with China, and we want to find those military to military de-escalation points, we want to find those accords on fentanyl, on public health, on climate, we're going to be strong too. We're going to be strong too. We're going to be strong in our military posture in the Indo-Pacific. We're going to be strong in our diplomatic posture with South Korea and Japan and the Philippines and Australia. And we're going to be strong in articulating and defending our values.
Spending time with Congressman Auchincloss here on Bloomberg Sound On, just a day after the Senate voted to pass the stopgap measure, the continuing resolution that passed the House of Representatives. Without your support, Congressman, I know that you had a lot of concerns about the process. You were looking for funding for Israel and Ukraine as well. What actually made you vote no?
In Washington, a member is only as good as his word. When I last voted to bail out the GOP from their dysfunction in September by voting yes on their continuing resolution, I said it was the last time until I saw clear, concrete, and credible plans to support Ukraine. And in the interim, Israel has come under attack. So now we have to support Ukraine and Israel, both of whom are fighting on the front lines of the free world against tyranny and against terror. And the GOP, instead of putting forward robust funding to defend democracy, instead are just careening from crisis to crisis. So I could not put my vote towards this stopgap short-term spending measure that fails to meet the moment. And the onus now is on the House Republican Conference and the Senate Republican Conference to negotiate in good faith on border security policy, on Ukraine aid, so that we can unlock a bipartisan agreement to get the whole package passed before the holidays, not just Israel, but Taiwan, Ukraine, border security all together.
Before the holidays is an important part of that statement, Congressman. That would be quite a maneuver. It might set a land speed record in the, I believe, 20 legislative days that we have left here between now and a potential government shutdown in January. You think that'll be handled before the government is funded for the next fiscal year, though? We don't have to wait months and months to hear about Israel and Ukraine.
It should be. Nobody should be breaking for the holidays until our allies have the materiel and humanitarian support necessary to continue defending their democracies. And it's doable. The Senate is passing paper back and forth right now. We understand what the unlock would be, and that is negotiations on border security policy. I have been early and strong in support of those negotiations. I understand that some Democrats are recalcitrant on ceding anything on border security policy changes. I see it differently. I think that we really should be looking to upgrade and improve border security because it's not secure right now, despite the president's best efforts, despite his actions within the bounds of law and humanity. The border is seeing crossings that far outpace the infrastructure it has to handle them. And we do need more funding. We do need to make changes there. It's going to be a compromise, but that's the point of Congress, is to craft governance that gets to 80% answers.
Hear, hear. From your lips to God's ears when it comes to a number of these issues and the potential for Democrats and Republicans to work together in this new structure here. Congressman, you're a combat veteran. You know what it's like to walk with a rifle in your hand and lead an infantry division. Obviously, your experience in Afghanistan, and you just mentioned Panama, speaks to that. And I wonder if you could shed light on what's happening now in Gaza. We've been hearing from the administration a message of restraint, a very deep concern about civilian lives, but also an Israeli army, the individual soldiers who are in great danger walking into Gaza City. What's your thought?
Military operations on urban terrain are the most challenging of any format to execute. And now the IDF is not just going door to door, it's literally going room to room. And it's going room to room, having to discern between non-combatants and combatants, because Hamas uses Palestinian denizens as human shields. Hamas is holding hostages in underground tunnels. Hamas is storing munitions and command and control centers threaded through civilian infrastructure like hospitals and schools. So the IDF has a daunting task before it. It needs to hold itself to the law of armed conflict, which requires distinction and necessity and proportionality. It also needs to aggressively execute its priorities, which are, number one, rescuing those hostages. Number two, destroying Hamas. No ceasefire, no truce with terrorists. Hamas needs to be dismantled. And then number three is helping to architect just post-war governance for Gaza. And I'm going to continue to be strongly in support of our ally as they defend the Jewish homeland and their citizens.
Well, you know, we've got a fascinating story from our Pentagon reporter, Congressman, that the Defense Department is already ramping up military aid to Israel beyond what we've heard about in terms of the Iron Dome and the smart bombs from Boeing. But in fact, more laser-guided missiles for Apache gunships, 155 millimeter shells, night vision devices, bunker buster munitions, even the new Humvees rather, and Switchblade drones. Outside of all of this, does Israel need more than that? What would the supplemental bring that it's not already getting?
I can't speak to the tactical needs of Israel. I'm just not close enough to their operations. I have great confidence in the Pentagon, based on my briefings with them, that they are doing hourly assessments and close collaboration with the IDF based on longstanding relationships of trust to discern what IDF needs. And so part of this is going to be sending aid and munitions to the IDF, and part of it's going to be backfilling our own supplies to ensure that we are ready come what may. Because as we see, when the president had to deploy 2 carrier strike groups to the Eastern Mediterranean, the 911 calls can come any hour of the day, and the United States needs to be ready to defend the global order.
Well, you know what that's like firsthand, and I have to ask you before you leave about Ukraine, because some would argue that the needs are in fact more desperate in Ukraine, and if we roll into next year, their efforts to defend themselves could in fact be interrupted by a lack of funding. Is that how you see it?
The window of opportunity is closing. I don't want to put a date on it, but there's no doubt that the window of opportunity heading into an election year, as the Republican conference is increasingly subservient to the isolationism and fifth columnism of Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump, that we are losing the political capital in Congress to fund our ally, and it's unacceptable. They are fighting on the front lines of the free world right now. For about 10% of the Pentagon's annual budget, we have cratered half of Russia's conventional military capacity. We have doubled NATO's border. We have induced greater defense spending from our allies in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. This has been a tremendous return on investment for national security dollars. And it has signaled not just to Vladimir Putin, but also to Xi Jinping, that America is always going to stand with right over might. And that message resonates. I assure you that they are watching closely congressional actions on Ukraine in Beijing as well as in the Kremlin.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play
With all the
Bloomberg
gyrations
1130.
and chaos we've seen in the House of Representatives the past couple of weeks, I've been known to say, look no further than the chair of the admin committee. If you want stability, his name is Bryan Steil, the congressman from Wisconsin, joins us right now. And it's good to see you, Congressman. You've been a reliable voice through this whole thing from your perch, not only as head of the admin committee. By the way, Google it. You'll see how important that is. But also your service on the Financial Services Committee. The fact that you helped to tally the votes for our new speaker. I remember seeing you in the speaker's rostrum on those important days. I wonder your thoughts today as your colleagues head home for the holidays. The government's not going to shut down. Was this an important week in getting your conference together?
Well, another frustrating week, I think, is to where we are in the House of Representatives and Congress writ large. The good news is we were successful in keeping the government funded, open, and operational. We could have seen another shutdown. That doesn't actually help anybody. And at the end of the day, we actually spend more money to shut the federal government down than we do to keep it open. And so it's been challenging times, but the good news is maybe this Thanksgiving week ahead will give everybody a time to kind of calm down and cooler heads will prevail because there's huge challenges facing us when Washington gets back to work.
Well, there sure are. And I don't have to tell you what everyone's saying. We just prolonged the inevitable. We're going to shut down again in January. Are you worried that there's not enough time with this continuing resolution to figure all this out?
Well, I think there is sufficient time, but I think people have to come to the table and have an adult conversation and figure out how we're going to navigate this. And so the federal spending process has been broken for a long time on Capitol Hill. We're trying to follow what we call regular order, which simply means following a law that was passed in 1974 that hasn't worked terribly well. What we need to do is get a little bit more serious here in Washington about what programs we can actually afford to fund and which ones we can't. But also a broader conversation that 75% of all federal government spending is on autopilot. We're only having this part of the debate of federal government spending on 25% of the total federal budget. No business would operate this way, and it adds a unique challenge here on Capitol Hill.
You know, I'm hearing more and more people talk about that. But when, you talk to anyone running for president, they won't touch it. Speaker might not be ready to touch that either. The last one certainly was not. Swearing off Medicare and Social Security, and talk about prolonging the inevitable. At some point, we're going to have to get to this, Congressman. And if it were up to you, would it be part of this process starting next year? How long do we have to manage this?
Well, I do think Speaker Mike Johnson actually hit the nail on the head and was willing to bring it up in his first speech as he became Speaker of the House. He discussed the importance of having a debt commission, bringing Democrats and Republicans together to say, we need to get serious about the fiscal challenges that we're facing. And I think the debt commission model actually works quite well, but it does take the political heft of everyone coming to the table to say, we're actually going to get this done. What's the biggest driver of that? I think it's the rising interest costs on the debt, the carry costs if you're in the financial markets. It becoming more and more serious as we see interest payments on the debt approaching $1 trillion.
I know you don't want to have this conversation, but there are two sides to this. You can cut spending or you can raise revenues. Does the Ways and Means Committee play a role here?
An absolutely critical role in Ways and Means. I wouldn't lose sight, though, of the fact that economic growth is going to be a key driver. So if we look back coming into the pandemic, what we actually saw was economic growth driving tax revenue higher, not by raising rates in taxes, but rather by growing the economy. That is our best path forward to grow ourselves out of this. That alone isn't going to solve all the problems, but it's got to be part of the conversation.
But it'll make it a lot easier. Were you a fan of this idea of the laddered CR, the fact that we're looking at two dates? I've asked so many people this, Congressman, what the benefit is, where that or how that advantages the speaker or the Republican conference. Maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way.
I don't think it's a massively significant difference. It maybe does give us an opportunity to break these apart and say, let's start getting some of the 12 spending bills across the line. Every one that we get done is a step in the right direction. I would say the biggest win on this stopgap measure is it avoids a Christmas Eve spending bill going through where every ornament is on the Christmas tree.
That's right. Well, there's some big ornaments out there. I actually really probably shouldn't call them that because they're awfully serious. And I'm referring to the supplemental request. We talked about it earlier this hour with your colleague Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts, Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and border. You're probably getting tired of hearing guys like me rattle this off, but I wonder if there will be an opportunity to pass these in one block or if the speaker has the right approach here, Congressman, and vote on each of them individually.
I think we're best served if we break them apart. I think we have a true opportunity to get the Israel funding through to make sure that we're providing the resources Israel needs as it defends itself against the terrorist attacks that occurred from Hamas. I think as we look to the Ukraine funding, it's more likely that it's the end of the day gets combined with true border security. Making sure that we secure the U.S.-Mexico border is of absolute paramount importance. And I think as we look at that opportunity, we may see that ultimately paired with the Ukraine funding is a mechanism of forcing the Biden administration to truly change course on its border policies.
I almost wish we could have you on together because Jake Auchincloss, who is an ally of this White House from Big Blue, Massachusetts, is very open to having that conversation. He told us on the air that Democrats need to come to the table on border security. It's about time. He said the crossings are simply too high. So if he were sitting here now, where would you start? We hear from a lot of Republicans, Congressman, they say the border's open. Obviously, that's not literal. But how would you start to lower the flow of illegal immigrants crossing the border?
Yeah, Jake's a friend of mine. We actually discussed this on the House floor last week, so it's funny you bring it up. I think there's some pretty straightforward policies that we could move forward on. In particular, a stay in Mexico policy, which tells people who want to apply for asylum that it's better and safer to remain in your home country when that application process goes through. What we do know is the overwhelming majority of individuals who have a claim for asylum, when those claims are finally adjudicated, they're found out to not be with merit. The challenge is those claims are often not heard for 3 to 4 years. So a stay in Mexico policy is actually the right policy. That's a Trump era policy. The other piece of this is critical funding for border security. The Border Patrol agents are currently understaffed. They're underfunded. And we need to get serious in those regards. And then the third piece that I think should have some people being willing to come together is to say we need more judges to adjudicate the cases that are already here and in the pipeline. People deserve their day in court if they truly do have an asylum claim. There's a path for that. But again, the overwhelming majority of individuals crossing illegally don't actually have a claim that is validated when it's actually adjudicated on the merits.
So we've made some important distinctions here, and I would love to have you and Congressman Auchincloss join at some point here on Bloomberg to talk this out. Maybe we'll move the needle on it a little bit, and I just wonder if there's a point in making the difference here, distinguishing between border security and immigration policy, because this is obviously an incredibly tight labor market in this country, and we need immigrants from other countries, in many cases very smart people, to help us in the high-tech space, in other cases with manual labor that we can't get other people to do. Is that not part of this debate, or should it be?
It's got to be part of the conversation because we have both a broken legal immigration system as well as a broken illegal immigration system.
Yes.
The challenge is that under the past 2.5 years under the Biden administration, the broken illegal immigration system has gotten so bad that we need to address that before we can really have the conversation that is needed about fixing the broken legal immigration system. And in many ways, as we look at what's playing out right now, our current asylum laws are being abused by individuals to the benefit of illegal immigration. In many ways, Mexican drug cartels that are now making money trafficking individuals into the United States of America. And so breaking that system of the illegal immigration side is going to be absolutely essential before we can really get the political heft and the work done to address the broken legal immigration system.
Well, we definitely covered some important ground there. And the fact of the matter is you can't get anything done without a convincing majority here, or at least it's a lot more difficult. And Speaker Johnson mentioned recently in an interview on Fox that it might actually happen that you lose a member, that you lose a seat in an already thin majority. And I wonder if you're worried that might be George Santos of New York. We heard from the Ethics Committee today. I'm sure it's not a fun thing to talk about, Congressman, but there seems to be another effort to expel the gentleman from New York. Do you think that's going to happen?
The Ethics Committee came out just a couple hours ago with their findings of fact. I think I owe it to the Ethics Committee and to the constituents in New York a full review of that report. But I can tell you the top line is incredibly concerning. And the ultimate punishment that can be handed out is expulsion. And I'm going to review the report before finalizing that decision. But I can tell you the illegal actions that are set forward in this report are incredibly concerning.
Are you colleagues? Is he part of the conference? Do you guys see each other at meetings, or is he, in his office with the door closed? That's been the experience for reporters.
Yeah, I don't have a deep relationship with him. Obviously, he's occasionally on the House floor when we have votes, as are all 435 members. But again, I think people are going to review this on the merits, on the facts. And I think that's what we owe it to the American people, but in particular his constituents, if the final decision is to expel him from Congress.
Understood. When you come back to town, assuming you're going to get back to Wisconsin at some point, Congressman, what's the first order of business? You're going to have roughly 20 legislative days when you come back to the potential shutdown to the time this CR expires. How do you start by getting your arms around it?
As we look out to coming back from Thanksgiving and Congress getting back to work, getting our funding bills, which are already behind the deadline, getting those done is going to be absolutely essential. We got to do that at the same time is looking at the U.S. national security situation, particularly as it relates to both Israel and Ukraine and U.S.-Mexico border policy. All of that has to be accomplished before the end of the year to be successful. It's a lot on our plate, but getting the stopgap measure through this week, I think really improves our opportunity to be able to spend the time and attention that's needed to address those when we come back.
Well, I hope that it's a very happy and healthy Thanksgiving for you and your family in the 1st District of Wisconsin. Congressman, I hope you get home soon enough. Same goes for your staff. Thanks for being here for us to answer not only the easy ones, but the tough ones sometimes. It's good to see you. Bryan Steil with us, the congressman here on Bloomberg Sound On.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Catch the program live weekdays at 1 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the TuneIn app, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
2 years ago yesterday, I want you to just dial back in your brain. Where were you when Scores sat on a very chilly and bright north lawn of the White House? Actually, I guess it was on the south lawn for a massive signing ceremony in which President Biden reminded us of the prior administration and how we continued to try to celebrate Infrastructure Week. Well, now it's been Infrastructure 2 years. And joining us to get things started here before we bring in Secretary Pete Buttigieg is our buddy Jordan Fabian from Bloomberg's White House team. Were you on the lawn for that? Were you following the poll reports that day? You might not even remember that.
I was spared the cold weather.
Good for you. Yes.
I was in the warm confines.
Well, one thing you did do was endure months and months of debate and wrangling over this thing. A lot of folks started to think it wouldn't even be possible. It ended up being a bipartisan affair. I think we can call it that. There are enough D's and R's to call it that. But it's one that was not embraced by a lot of Republicans who've since been celebrating the arrival of money to their states. And I think President Biden might have predicted that, but that's the way Washington works. Is this the crowning achievement for this administration?
It's definitely up there with the Inflation Reduction Act and the COVID rescue plan that he passed early on.
That's the Trinity.
Yeah, I would say those are the big three, if you will,
Yep.
to make a sports analogy. Look, I think that the president, you'll probably see him try to campaign on this as part of the way that he's going to try and convince Americans that the economy is heading in the right direction under his leadership. But it's not going to be easy because while this is a big achievement, a lot of these projects that were funded by this law are going to take months and years to get off the ground. And so Americans aren't necessarily seeing the byproduct of this law yet. But, 5-10 years from now, when Amtrak might be running smoother, the highway might have fewer potholes, a new bridge is in town. That's when you'll see the effects. But is it too late for him politically with 2024 staring him down the way here?
That's the real stuff, right? That's the stuff that people see and are impacted by. But how many years is the implementation? We can talk to the secretary about this in a moment. Do you have a sense? I mean, is this over the course of the next decade you're going to see cranes popping up around the country?
Absolutely. Look, for example, at the Amtrak announcement that he made. I believe it was last week. He went to an Amtrak facility in Delaware.
That's right, yeah.
Announced $16 billion for rail reconstruction, new bridges, new tunnels. That's all going to take a very long time to build. But at the end of the day, and combined with that Gateway project up in New York that's going to expand the train capacity, you could see a rail system that, at least in the Northeast, is running a lot better than it is now. But that could take 5-10 years,
Sure.
if not longer, to build, just looking at the track record of these kind of projects in the U.S.
Great to have you back, as always. Jordan Fabian, Bloomberg White House reporter. Hang out if you have some time, Jordan. You're always welcome here as we welcome the Secretary of Transportation. Pete Buttigieg is with us now live on Bloomberg. Mr. Secretary, it's great to see you. I want to welcome you back to Bloomberg. And I guess I should start by saying happy birthday. We were joking earlier. It was Infrastructure Week until it became Infrastructure Year in your administration. We were just discussing with Jordan Fabian. This is one of the big three crowning achievements of your administration. And I know that we've already started to see some of the benefits of that in terms of broadband connections in rural areas. What comes next?
Well, what's exciting about this stage is we are seeing more and more of the projects move into a construction phase. We have identified 40,000 infrastructure projects, the majority of them transportation related, that are getting benefits from this bill. And it's only been 2 years since the president signed it. It's a 5-year bill. So every month we're going to see projects added to that roster, and we're going to see them move through the process toward completion. The thing that's been the most exciting and gratifying for me is the range of the projects getting done. Some of them are multi-year projects. I call them the cathedrals of our infrastructure. I heard you just a moment ago mentioning the president's announcements, one of which brings the Hudson River Tunnel to a level of funding that makes it one of the biggest public works projects in recent American history. All the way through to some, 6-figure grants that we're doing that are transformative for a rural community that needs a deadly intersection to be redesigned, or even a municipal airport to be redone. So we're seeing things that are large and small, rural and urban. And of course, that was the president's vision in pushing so hard for this bill in the first place. That wouldn't just be a particular project. It wouldn't even be confined to one mode of transportation. It's trains, planes, automobiles, and beyond.
You just mentioned a really important component here, and that is the 5-year lifespan of this bill, of this law. Will it be fully implemented in that time, Secretary? And do you wish you could front load some of the stuff that's going to take a couple of years?
Yeah, so that's how long we have to move the funding. But the way the bill is set up is we can get some of it out the door sooner rather than later. So it's not just that kind of 1/5 of the money moves each of those 5 years, and we want to do as much as we can quickly. Of course, the only thing more important than doing it quickly is doing it right. We're talking about taxpayer dollars. We're going through lots of steps to make sure that they're spent responsibly and effectively. But already north of $200 billion have moved. And this is what it's going to take to really achieve that generational investment that the president was so focused on in pushing for this bill in the first place.
What's been, in this 2-year period, the biggest challenge of implementing this law? I know you've had Mayor Landrieu crisscrossing the country trying to put money to projects and implement what is a sweeping piece of legislation. What's the biggest hangup that you've faced?
Well, certainly delivery is a challenge. It's one thing to get a project funded, which is why most of these projects never got off the ground up until now. But it's another to see it all the way from getting funded to actually going into construction, and then getting to that great day when we cut the ribbon and that new airport, that improved tunnel, that fixed up bridge, whatever it is there for everybody to use and to take advantage of. One of the biggest challenges has been workforce, which of course macroeconomically is a much better issue to have have, where are we going to find the workers compared to the issue of where are they going to find the work? But it's still an issue. And it's one of the reasons why we've been very proactive on that. Our department's participating in a program that the president's called for workforce hubs to be set up around the country and getting creative. Yep. Things like a facility I saw in Pittsburgh. They're doing a major airport project there. There are a lot of working parents, working moms in particular, who are working in construction on that project who have a chance to do it because they set up a daycare at the construction site. A simple, smart move that unlocked a new source of human capital and gave more workers access to these good-paying, sometimes life-transforming union construction jobs. So we're going to have to be creative to address some of those constraints in our supply side, whether it's workforce, skill, raw materials even. But those are exactly the kinds of problems that we went into this line of work to be able to tackle because we're finally past the problem of there not being any funding out there.
Well, I know I'm not supposed to ask you this, and maybe you don't want to answer it, but I wonder if you worry about implementation of this bill being potentially interrupted if a Republican were to win the White House. Are you allowed to talk to me about that? What would happen?
Well, I guess what I'd say is that when politics interfere, it's never good. I mean, we saw that recently with these shutdown threats. That would have slowed us down or even stopped us on vital things like air traffic control, hiring, which I think we all recognize we need to be doing more, not less right now. And it would have impacted at least some of the infrastructure work going on. And right now, without getting into campaigns and elections, I can tell you that right now we have a congressional GOP in the House that is proposing major cuts that would cut our ports program. It would cut the program we've used to build safer railroad infrastructure. So I do worry about that, but I also think we have a pretty strong defense against that, which is the fact that when these projects actually happen, when we announce them, even the elected officials who voted against the bill and fought the president at every turn, they seem to be perfectly happy to celebrate the projects with us, which I think is a good indication that this really is good policy.
I mentioned that before you came on in a conversation that we were having. Mr. Secretary, what do you tell these Republicans who have railed, and some still go on the floor? I think Tommy Tuberville was one of them, and then they go home and they celebrate the ribbon cutting. Is that actually is that a good problem for you to have because it sells the deal in the end, despite the headache putting this together?
Yeah, look, I have more appreciation for the handful of Republicans who crossed the aisle to work with Democrats and work with President Biden to get this bill done. But those who want to celebrate it after the fact, I guess, welcome to the party. These are going to benefit people. We don't have Republican roads or Democratic bridges. These are good projects regardless of politics, and they're going to benefit people regardless of their politics. And, we're not going to let constituents suffer because their particular representative was short-sighted about this. We're trying to really push past the politics and just get the work done.
Well, it's not every day we get the transportation secretary on the air, and we are talking with Pete Buttigieg here live on Bloomberg. We're a week out from Thanksgiving. My God, it's a week from today. I wonder what your team is working on and trying to anticipate in terms of disruptions or safety concerns on one of the busiest travel periods of the year.
Well, over the summer, we saw numbers that broke records in terms of TSA screenings, showing us we had all-time record high levels of passengers taking to the air. I think the same thing is going to be true going into Thanksgiving and the winter holidays too. And so it's the most important thing to me is that the airlines be ready to take care of their passengers and that our department is ready to have those passengers back when they hit an issue. Compared to even 1.5 years ago, there is dramatically better, stronger passenger protection that our department can enforce. People should go to flightrights.gov, ideally before you buy a ticket, to learn a little more about what each of the different airlines is responsible for offering their passengers that again, we can enforce if there's an issue. We're also trying to make sure that operational concerns are being met. That's why we're aggressively working to modernize FAA technology, hire more air traffic controllers to support that increased demand. Economically, it's welcome to see more and more people returning to the skies because remember, since we're talking about anniversaries and what it was like a couple of years ago, it was only a little over a couple of years ago, everybody was wondering if the airlines would go out of business. Now we have kind of the opposite set of problems. We just need to make sure the system can keep up.
So no meltdowns, no big Southwest messes this year that we have to plan for.
Well, there better not be. And if there is a problem, the airlines know that we are going to be on it very quickly and holding them accountable. But look, we've seen, to their credit, we've seen them step up. We've seen a lot of improvement. The rate of cancellations is actually below what it was before COVID so far this year. I'm looking to the airlines to keep that up, and we'll do everything we can to help them meet those goals.
Mr. Secretary, I want you to know that your views are important to us around here. We like to wonk out on policy on this show, so I'd love to see you again and continue this conversation. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, hope you have a great Thanksgiving.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for being with us, as always. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg Sound On. Jordan's still here. I convinced him to hang out for a minute, and I'm curious, Jordan, Fabian, your thoughts on this from your perch at the White House. This is going to be the rollout here for the administration. How did he do?
I think they have the right idea, which is to try and get this money out the door as quick as possible, but also making sure that that money isn't just being siphoned off or stolen. That it's going to the right place. But of course, the struggle is going to be again. Going back to the politics of this, which he's limited in what he can talk about. How does the president ensure that he receives credit? And this is something the president talked about in the Obama administration. He still talks about it now. That
the sales pitch.
That they did that big stimulus project. I'm sure some Americans remember those tiger signs that were around on road projects about 15 years ago.
Yes,
no one knew what tiger was. It was the Obama stimulus that funded those.
Your tax dollars paid for this. Same for Obamacare, right? He said they should have taken a whistle stop tour around the country just to explain to people what it was.
Right, and so I'm interested to see heading into the campaign here. And Biden has done this a few times, but does he lean into it more, where he gets a little aggressive, goes into a district or a state? I could think of the Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky and Ohio, like right in Mitch McConnell's backyard.
He showed up for it.
He showed up and made nice. But as we turn to 2024, does he go in there and throw some elbows and said, "Hey, the reason this bridge is happening ain't because of Joe Schmo GOP. It's because of me.
It's because of me, the other Joe." Jordan, great to see you again. Jordan Fabian, he covers the White House for us and with us live on Bloomberg. Thanks again to the Secretary. Thanks for listening to the Sound On podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Bloomberg.com.